Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started. So just a brief introduction. My name is Mike Calabrese. For the past year or so, I've also been known as the guy that took over for Rich Armstrong. I'm excited to be here. On behalf of the department, I'd like to welcome you to the 20th PAC meeting for the i84 Hartford project. So we'll just go over the agenda real quick. We'll give you a quick purpose of the meeting, and then we'll do a recap of the project progress, and then we'll get into some new information that we want to share with you, some emergent considerations, and then the next steps after we have some discussions and Q&As. What happened? Sorry. All right, so the purpose of the meeting. So we're here today to share some new developments in the project. It's been a while since we talked to you. I think the last PAC meeting was back in March, so we've been working on things, and we just want to share some new developments for you. And then after that, we're open to have an open discussion for any questions you have or concerns. So now I'm going to pass it over to a familiar face to all of you, Casey Harden from Train Systems, and he's going to give the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Happy holidays, everybody. So like Mike alluded to, we're going to start just by kind of recapping where we've been with the i84 Hartford project before we get to these new developments. So when we were here last in March, we gave a presentation talking about construction staging. We identified a series of phases in which the lowered highway alternative could be constructed. And then we talked to you about the DEIS process. So we were in the middle of writing this document. We were going to go away, write that, go to a public hearing, and the various next steps through the NEPA process. And we talked to you a little bit about how you could continue to be involved both during those steps as well as moving forward beyond them. So since that time period, we have been working to continue to advance that EIS, and where that is in the broader picture of the NEPA process is pretty close to the end, right? We had identified the purpose and need way back in 2014, working with many of you here in the advisory committee. And moving beyond the EIS, the end of NEPA is that record of decision, which was scheduled as of the last schedule for 2021. And just wanted to remind everyone that that was the end point of the funding we currently had for the program. Now, just wanted to refresh everyone on what exactly the problem that we've been working on solving is here as part of this NEPA process. And of course, it started with the bridge deficiencies, with the various structures in the corridor reaching the end of their service life. But we're also looking to address those traffic and safety deficiencies associated with the antiquated design, the left-hand exit and entrance, as well as some of the curvature, lack of shoulders, short weave distances that contribute to a lot of the congestion we see in the corridor. Now with that, we're always looking at mobility both along and across the corridor as well, which included looking at the rail, CT fast track, and the bus system, as well as the local streets that cross, including bicyclists and pedestrian mobility. We'd also come up with these other desirable outcomes, which also known as goals and objectives. And to steal a phrase from Rich Armstrong, it was really about making I-84 a better neighbor in the city of Hartford. So this process had led to what had emerged as a recommended preferred alternative with the lowered highway. Now that relied on lowering I-84 to or below grade throughout the corridor, that's denoted by that blue line, be under all the local streets, providing some opportunities for highway capping. Associated with that, we had the rail realignment, shifting it to the north and to the west of the freeway. I'm just going to pull up the laser pointer. Yeah, so relocating the rail here to the north and west with a potential new station located just north of Asylum Street. The CT fast track would cross over to the south, help serve the downtown and CBD. And associated with the reconstruction, there'd be local street improvements, some of which I think we knew there would still be some decisions made after the NEPA process. The Trident we've talked a lot about, as well as some of the areas in Asylum Hill. So with all that said, that's where we've been. We've alluded to these emergent considerations and a change in direction. So I'm going to walk you through some of the factors that have led to that as we come to the formal decision-making process. So first of all, we've heard a lot from you for the last 7 years. We've heard a lot from other avenues of the public, other stakeholders, and one recurring theme. These are kind of a list of all of them. I'm not going to go through each of them specifically, but one big thing has been that we should be looking at a bigger picture. This project, and I have a map and a couple slides that speaks to it well. But this project looks at transportation issues and is trying to solve a range of them, but within one relatively small piece of Hartford and the region as a whole. So as we considered some other transportation initiatives that have come to play and have been worked on concurrently by others, some, for example, the i84 90 interchange by this team, we started to realize just how connected those transportation initiatives are. And as we, especially with the NEPA process, looking to understand how these transportation projects would affect the environment, we're really starting to realize how they need to be considered together. I have a couple maps here just to kind of illustrate that graphically. So, if this magnifying glass, this map really shows kind of the Hartford, East Hartford region. You can see the river there through the middle. So the I84 Hartford project, the viaduct project, really looks at that area just to the west of the CBD where those I84 bridge structures are. When you start to zoom out and consider some of the other potential transportation initiatives, you start with, for example, the railroad corridor. And we presented to you a couple years ago some findings from the Hartford Rail AA that looked at identifying solutions to the Hartford Rail Viaduct that goes to Union Station. There's also a desire to help improve the frequency of the service north of Hartford to make that a little bit better commuter service in terms of increasing the frequency. And there are some actual engineering challenges associated with that, including a bridge over the Connecticut River, including getting the double tracking in north of Hartford. We presented our initial findings for the 84-91 interchange to you last September. And one of the first things that had come up to us in our traffic analysis for this project was how, while we may be able to address some of the geometric deficiencies in the I84 viaduct corridor, ultimately the interchange would represent a bottleneck that would still leave congestion, particularly in the afternoon peaks, that would continue to cause backups through the project area. So ultimately, as we looked at a variety of concepts that could help address that interchange, each of them really would be affected by this project. Recently, DOT had published a Fast Track East expansion study looking at extending the CT Fast Track branded service east to the river, and that's happening. There are routes that can take you to Manchester or beyond to stores. And one of the things in our conversations with public trans over at DOT has been the desire for a guideway that could connect through the city, that could help their vehicles get through the city without needing to get down to the local street level and be separate from traffic. So that's an option that could help get things across the Connecticut River. Now, our I84 project does look at CT Fast Track, but it's really limited again to that geographic corridor just to the west of the CBD. We talk about into East Hartford now, and highways being a better neighbor. We know the Mixmaster interchange there, where I-84 and Route 2 and 15 then come together, represents a big space that's occupied by these freeways. And as we consider options that looked at the 84-91 interchange, they would subsequently need to look at that interchange as well. And last but certainly not least, there's several gaps in the East Coast Greenway network in this corridor, both in Hartford and East Hartford. And while we've tried to incorporate a connection in the 84 viaduct area, there's still a gap in East Hartford between the Charter Oak Greenway and the Riverfront Trail. And ultimately, this is a facility that, especially in an urban environment, isn't just a recreational facility. It's a transportation option, one that can help reduce demand on the freeway network, give people options for different ways to get into the city. So with all that said, we just felt that the prudent decision was to take a step back and take a more holistic look at the transportation approach to the Hartford region. And we think that's going to be the best way to really provide the overall vision for both the city and for the region. Now, we considered some different ways to do that, and obviously we were in the NEPA process for the i84 Hartford project. But that was, sort of set out a very specific area, and ultimately NEPA in itself is relatively rigid in terms of what you need to do, the level of detail, and there's been a process recently that's been adopted that's actually pre-NEPA called a planning environmental linkage study. And so ultimately we think that's the best way to take the work that's been done, combine that, look at some of these other aspects as well in a more comprehensive manner, and give us a more efficient route moving forward. There's a couple examples we have, both in the state. They're conducting one on the i84 Danbury project, and there's several other examples around the country. We actually have some fact sheets available for those that are interested in a little bit more information on the planning environmental linkage, or PEL. So I'm going to just kind of recap some of the different factors that went into the decision. And again, like I mentioned, NEPA and some of the challenges associated with looking at the impacts of these transportation initiatives together. So doing this study will allow us to do that in a comprehensive manner. We've also taken into consideration that idea of looking at the bigger picture and seeing that bigger opportunity. And we think that's going to be a big part of this as well. Also, the repairs that have been done recently to the viaduct structures have left them in a state where the department is comfortable with their status with continued maintenance and work for at least the next decade or so, and that allows us some continued ability to look at what the long-term solution to those is. Now, there still is a need to establish, what the long-term plan is to replace those structures, and that'll continue to be part of this process. Funding, not to be the elephant in the room, but obviously we've talked to you a lot about the cost of the lowered highway at potentially $3 to $5 billion. These other programs also as well, and with the current issues associated with revenue, at the exact moment, it's hard to understand exactly how moving forward the next steps would fund the construction work. This process is designed to allow you to also look into some of those fiscal aspects, and we'll be able to look into potential financing opportunities to help ensure the program moves forward. And lastly, but certainly not least, is mobility and congestion. And we certainly understand some of the recent discussion about bottlenecks around the state, and with the interchange being within the top bottleneck in Connecticut and the top 20 nationwide, certainly something that we want to look at in terms of congestion. But this is really about people moving. It's about looking at these other modes, ensuring the rail service, ensuring the bus service, ensuring bike ped networks are best able to help manage that demand on the freeway network, and then ensuring that the freeway networks don't have unnecessary bottlenecks and design deficiencies that are creating congestion all their own. So with all that's led us to this decision to undertake the Greater Hartford Mobility Study. And that's gonna, like I've said over the last couple of slides, allow us to really develop this broader vision and address these various modes all in one piece and assess their potential impacts. Now, many of you may be thinking, how does this affect any start of construction? I just wanted to recap that the current i84 schedule was looking at construction occurring late in the 2020s and potentially really into the early 2030s, when you'd really start to see heavy activity. And with the funding currently only available through the ROD, I think I would be honest in saying that schedule in and of itself would potentially be in jeopardy. Now, ultimately, we believe that by completing this study in about 2 or 3 years, it will give us this process, the PEL process, does provide the opportunity to look at individual projects that can be broken out and advanced into through NEPA, through design and into construction. And that could allow us to find some elements that could move forward in a way that could not ultimately delay the start of any construction work. So just going to go through our next steps here. In terms of i84 Hartford, the plan is to stop the NEPA work. Now that work is not lost. It will be folded into, along with the work developed for the 84 9-2 interchange, into this next phase, into this next study. And in terms of that study, the funding is available, and our next steps are to outline our scope of work, understand what our outreach program will include, and identify those upcoming milestones and schedule. Now, again, you guys have been a terrific part of this whole process, and there's going to continue to be opportunity for you to be involved in the mobility study, and we're going to continue to seek your input. There will also be additional stakeholders, given the broader geographic scope, that we'll be looking to include as well. So that's it for the presentation. We are certainly here and happy to take any questions.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a shorter presentation than we've had in past PAC presentations, primarily because what we really wanted to do is listen to you. When we want to hear your comments and thoughts and questions on this process. This is a PAC meeting. You guys have been fabulous partners throughout this several-year process we've gone through. I know there are other non-PAC members here. I would say, please, let's just keep the questions to the PAC members first, and then at the end of the meeting, we'll entertain questions from anybody else out in the audience. I will go around the room since we are recording this. I would like to have you at least speak into the microphone, and then one of our experts on the team will respond to your question. So, this is a big change, or maybe not such a big change. Who would like to offer the first comment? Amy.
So if you could just talk a little bit more about the timeline for when this, folding, it seems like the folding has happened or is happening, but for instance, when would we all be called upon again to start having some input moving forward?
So this Pell process is going to take about, we're estimating between 2 and 3 years. So the next time we come out for any public involvement, I don't know, by the time, like Casey was saying, by the time we get a scope of work put together, and by the time, it could be maybe in the summer of next year, you'll start seeing some involvement from the PAC again. Or public outreach anyway.
So just to clarify, when you're developing the scope of work that you're going to be doing, what will be are those 5 things that you put up on those slides, are those the areas that you're going to be looking at in the scope of work for the Pell? Is that what's going to happen?
We need to come up with the process of how to handle the whole area, like the whole region. So right now we've been focused on that 2-mile section. So we need to just figure out, what do we need to look at? The 5 or 6 things that we focused on definitely are going to be part of that scope. So we kind of, the whole point of this Pell is to make sure that none of those things interact with each other and causes one of them not to be able to come up with the best solution for the whole region. So I don't know if that, so.
I think the modes certainly will. I mean, it's going to look at the highway network, it's going to look at rail, it's going to look at buses, it's going to look at bicyclists and pedestrians. I think what Mike's alluding to is we're going to have to look at the geographic area to really understand exactly where those boundaries are. That's probably what we have to figure out more than anything. But I think the modes are there, making sure we look at the.
So really, what you're going to do is you're going to basically take the, I guess now smaller project of I84 and kind of just make it much larger because you're looking at a more comprehensive vision for the region and how
Correct.
it impacts everything.
Right.
So the Pell process, you'll develop a scope, and then will that be do you have to seek federal funds?
No, for the Pell, we have funding in place for that
So
already.
you have funding in place,
Yes,
so that'll help
for the
you
Pell.
develop the scope and what
Correct.
you're actually going to look like with this much larger, interconnected.
Correct, but we're going to look at everything much broader. We're not going to get as detailed as it was during the whole NEPA process for the I84 project.
And you won't have to do a NEPA process if you do a
No. So Pell is basically pre-NEPA, right? So you're looking at it. So the ultimate, I think the ultimate thing for us, if we go through this Pell process, what that Pell should tell us is that you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 projects of independent utility that each one of those projects would have to go through the NEPA process. It's basically a planning study that kind of breaks everything up. All these projects would still have to go to some sort of NEPA process. Either if it's an EIS, it could be a categorical exclusion, which is much quicker and much easier to get through the NEPA process, or an EA, an environmental assessment. So the NEPA process will still have to be done for any projects that are created through this Pell process.
Okay?
Right, and with that process, we could potentially expedite some of the smaller projects to construction.
Yeah. And I still think there's a little bit of uncertainty. You're not, there's a part of your question that's unanswered?
I
Or,
mean, I think it's fantastic that you're looking at it
Yeah.
more than just the I-84 project, because I think this is much,
So-
I love that concept and that idea. I'm just trying to get a little bit, and I understand it's a little bit unclear. You don't know exactly
Right.
what the scope is, so I get that. So I think I'm just trying to see how that process will kind of work and when things kind of fit in.
and the reason we're not just rolling all of this into the current NEPA is because you've seen the level of detail that we're going through for just this piece of I-84. We would have to bring everything up to that same level of detail. It could take decades to get through a NEPA that big. So this is a process to expedite all of these, look at all these at a planning level, and then send them out individually into separate NEPA processes. So,
Maybe just to give you an example. So if we had done this process 5 years ago, right? One of the things that could have been identified in this Pell was the Charter Oak improvements that are going right now, right? That's a project, it's a $250 million project. It could have been identified in the Pell. It could have gone through a separate NEPA process and put out to construction ahead of any of these bigger projects. So that's why when we say, when it might expedite some construction projects, it's those smaller, more manageable projects that we can get out quicker, once they're identified in the Pell.
start with Jackie.
What about, did I miss something? Larson's 91, Barringham 91 project. Is that going to be part of our?
Yeah, it'll have to get addressed in the Pell process. Yep.
Why isn't that up there then?
Because that's part of, when we talk about the 84-91 interchange, that's what it encompasses. Larson's proposal as well.
And there could be other ideas that we haven't thought of yet that enter into this process. So, you know, it's kind of stepping back and looking at everything in totality, but that will be considered. Mr. Bruce.
So, 2 quick things. The first one is to follow that, which is what's much more buildable is the Northern Ring Road. And I would assume that that would be something that is on DOT's plate already. I don't know the answer to that.
Yes, because that's been part of the interchange study that's been done already. So yeah, that's,
All right.
all those, when we talk about the interchange, those are all the aspects of it, yes.
All right. And so I just wanted to update you all, funded projects, the East Coast Greenway, in about 4 years will be over 65% done in Connecticut. And you did mention one of the gaps, which of course is East Hartford around Pratt and Whitney, which had been funded, and then of course they decided to build the new technology building, and that didn't work. And Southern Bloomfield into Western Hartford. So those are the 2 major gaps in the area. And the rest of it primarily is going to be done down to New Haven and all the way to the Rhode Island border in a fairly quick period of time. So I want to mention that in terms of, mobility issues, in terms of bike ped,
Of
because
course.
this is going to end up being a major, major connector for the state.
Okay, thank you.
So you mentioned that smaller projects could be accelerated, but isn't there also a risk that other smaller projects could be held up and take longer if they were made part of the PAL? For instance, a rail station in West Hartford?
That I guess it could be a possibility if it's within the area of the Pell, but I don't know. I couldn't. If is there something already in the works for a?
Yeah, it's one of the stations planned in the Hartford line. It's 30%
Because it doesn't affect.
Was it not in the governor's plan? Is that? I think in the governor's plan, what we're seeing, and the I84 project was not included in that plan either, because it includes projects that were expected to be constructed within the next 10 years. Well, this-
So there's a lot of money's been spent on the design so far. It was held up a couple of years ago, but it's still planned for completion at some later point. Just like Windsor Locks, just like Newington, right? Hartford Line.
Hi, John Bernick, I'm with Officer Rail at Conduct. West Hartford Station was included in the NEPA document for the Hartford line, so there's already NEPA behind it. There wouldn't really be anything, the only thing that's really holding it up is funding.
Right, but my point is, if you're looking more holistically, I would imagine a rail station in West Hartford as a mode of transportation would likely be part of the PEL, or?
But I don't,
It's
I
not
think it would be
covered in
more,
this.
I think it would be more about
Right.
construction staging and mitigation for traffic. Would probably be where it would more likely come in.
Yeah, I don't believe the Pell area is going to cover that. Does
Right.
it?
No.
No, I don't think it does.
Okay.
Yeah, this is more focused on Hartford and East Hartford.
I just have something to add to that. Usually when you do a study, you would consider the no-build, and the no-build would consider anything that's in the works. And any project like the project just mentioned that had NEPA done, you would assume that project gets built. So the project would have to incorporate all the other improvements that are going on outside of the study.
Okay.
So what, West Hartford, if that has NEPA done, you'd consider that as part of the
Complete.
no-build.
okay.
As long as we're not doing anything to preclude that or to, get in
Which
the way
I
of
don't,
that.
yeah, I don't think we will.
Thank you, Dave.
This is a fairly startling change, and I wonder if you could elaborate on some of the reasons behind it.
Sure. So like Casey explained, maybe we can get back to that map, the mobility map. So there's a lot of factors that went into this decision, right? As we were progressing the 84 project, we've noticed, because of things we didn't know up till 2 years ago or a year ago, they did more work on the 84-91 interchange study, right? So we're seeing that there may be some conflicts between the I-84 project and that. There's the study for Fast Track East, getting the fast track over the river to East Hartford. We don't want to preclude any of these projects to go out by building something that gets in the way of them all. So that's why we're going to take a step back. Look, the bottom line is we want to take a step back to get the right answer. Because I think if we proceed the way we're going, we might not get the right answer for Hartford and for the region.
Yeah, and under the law, NEPA, and others could speak to this better than I, but if we went in the current direction and finished the NEPA process we're in now, got to a record of decision, and then in the future wanted to go back and take a look at the interchange or anything else which is considered a connected action according to the law, we may not be able to do that without significant challenges. And,
Right.
we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Furthermore, I think let's just be frank about the funding situation. We've always been very clear that we didn't have funding beyond the record of decision on the I-84 Hartford project. So what that means is we could have gotten to a point, and if no funding was in place, the project would have basically sat until some funding mechanisms were discovered. This is actually a good time to kind of pull back and take a look at this thing a little bit more geographically and broadly, as the funding is uncertain for all of these projects right now. So in some ways, the lack of funding has helped us take a pause and make sure we're getting it right. Mike has said this in the past. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this entire region. We don't want to mess it up. We're going to have to live with some of these decisions for 100 years. Other thoughts, questions from the PAC members?
I remember when we met last, when we met most recently, we talked about you explored a beltway type of model. Is that still on the table or no?
Are you talking about the interchange, like the northern alignment? Yes, that is still considered part of, would be considered part of the Pell.
Any questions from anybody in the back of the room? Anybody want to make a comment? How do people feel about this? Is this a good thing? Show of hands, good thing? We got about half yes, the other half no, and a few I guesses.
Well, I'm disappointed that, oh my God, another 20 years, you're going 20 years out again. That's bizarre. When we originally started this, we were gonna, by 2020, we'd be in the construction phase. Now, I'll admit I'm a little naive about construction, so what do I know? So it's hard to get excited about this because it's just a whole bunch of delays.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. It's frustrating, given the time that we've spent on the planning, but delays sometimes are beyond our control. That's where we're at. Did you have one?
I do have a question. So I understand the comprehensive nature of it, and then we'll say that there are 4 to 6 projects that end up coming out of the PAL process. How are they going to be prioritized from a construction standpoint?
An excellent question.
I think funding will will be a major one, just like it is with anything else. Purpose and need. So there's a lot of things that the department needs to address, and like I said, I think it'll be prioritized by purpose and need, and then the available funding. I think those are the two major factors for this.
So Mike, just as your backup, I'm Kim Lassay from DOT's Office of Environmental Planning. These guys have done a great job answering some of these questions. But within the Pell process, we actually can take a look at priorities. So as Mike mentioned, we would be looking at funding. We could be looking at the size of jobs. We could be looking at the priority. We could be looking at what could be broken out sooner. So the Pell process can really be scalable to what we want to do. So we think it's a great solution here. Certainly understand the frustrations of that. It seems like another delay. However, we think that this allows us to, again, take that broader step back. It allows us to take a look at what could be the purpose and need of some various projects. Where do the projects have logical termini? What makes sense? What works for the region as you connect them together? But it allows us to look at some of the, take a little deep dive into some of the things that we really need to know to make the right decision. So coming out of that Pell process will be a series of potential projects and how they would fall within a class of action in NEPA. So again, some of those might become, something as simple as a categorical exclusion. So I think it allows us to deliver to the Hartford region some things that could be improvements as we are financially constrained and making the best decisions. So it's a very flexible process. We're pretty excited about what might come out of it.
Thank you, Kim.
What about the rail bridge over Asylum Street? I thought that was in terrible shape.
Any bridge experts
John.
who can talk about the?
I think John's gonna.
John.
Yeah, it is. The implication is that we're going to be limited. We're going to be limited to single track over that bridge. What really limits that bridge is it's a lot of fatigue wear, and so it becomes. We can keep it in service. It's just a bit of a maintenance nightmare because Amtrak has to be in there continually, doing repairs to it as different elements. They do watch it very closely, but what we'd like and what really limits us is even from the beginnings of the Hartford Line project when we really started, the train meets, where they pass each other going northbound and southbound, want to happen in Hartford. No matter how you model it, that's where the train meets fall. We forced the train meets north of Hartford because that's the only place we could add track, which was why we added. There's actually 3 sets of tracks up in the Hartford Yard, up where the Xfinity Center is up there, right? But really having, the plan was up to 4 tracks, I think, would be really, really beneficial. But, until we get that, we're going to be limited to single track. We do what we can with the service to try operationally to add frequency, but it's a bit of a bubble. You push here and it pushes out there. So that's what the outfall is on that.
Thank you, John. Mary, do you have a question?
So I just wanted to voice the opinion that since you don't have funding, it makes total sense that we can take a step back and start looking broadly. And I'm relatively new to the table, so I'm kind of wondering why that wasn't done to begin with. Secondly, I just want to say your NEPA challenges are our NEPA protections. They're there for a reason. And that, if we look at it more as protecting what little we have left, especially in the viaduct area, that, we lost so much with the first 84, you're planning on losing more the second iteration, that I would just maybe like to see a change, maybe an attitude on that. But also, and I'm not sure how I think it might be helpful if you could explain more on how you're planning on setting up this process for the PAL. And that also to encourage you to keep all of these people here at the table with frequent input, including adding whoever needs to be added as you expand your scope.
Thank you. And I take a stab at the first part of your. Okay, or do you? The first part of the question was related to why wasn't this thought of before. And since you are one of the newer PAC members, we started this process because we had structural deficiencies that we felt needed to be rectified within the time frame that we were looking at. The bridges are still not in great condition, but they've been remediated quite a bit. The DOT has been doing a lot of bridge work out there. In fact, they've gotten a lot more life out of the recent round of improvements than was previously anticipated. So they expect, these things to be serviceable, in state of good repair up into 2040. So the urgency on the replacement of the bridges has dropped a little bit. Otherwise, we probably would still be going forward full bore on that. But we're confident that those bridges can be continue to be safe and serviceable throughout the next 20 years. So that's the first part of the question. Kim?
So I agree with you wholeheartedly, right? So a lot of the rules that are dictated by NEPA and promulgated through CEQ talk about having logical termini and making sure that we're looking at resources as a whole and that we're accounting for secondary and cumulative impact. So that indeed is another reason why indeed we're going towards this process. As we were looking at some of the eastern termini of what we're looking at Hartford Viaduct, again, we saw some conflicts coming up, and that would either preclude or dictate what we could do with the interchange or vice versa, right? So we need to take a step back under NEPA. We certainly didn't want to send the message that was the only reason for this switch, because there's a lot of reasons for this. And as far as public input, that is definitely part of the PEL process, right? So we would be reaching out to the community just like we have through this NEPA process, probably at a different level, right? We're going to be asking, are we missing anything? We're going to be needing to include new members because we're going a little bit more regionally wide. But we're definitely going to include the public and the regulatory agencies from the beginning. And we will gain some efficiencies as well when we go into NEPA because we'll have gathered a lot of critical information. And then, of course, for the viaduct piece, we have just fed all the information we need.
Thank you. Others? Tony?
I'm still trying to understand where this came from. This is a new program, right? The PEL?
It's not It's new to Connecticut. It's not new nationally. Other states have been doing this for many, many years. Colorado is, I guess, is the pioneer in this, and I don't know the other states.
Yeah, quite a few states it is new to Connecticut. It is kind of a new idea for us. If you follow a lot of the federal laws, one federal decision that came out of Executive Order 13807 is another thing that's pushing many states towards this Pell process. So one federal decision says that you have 2 years to complete an EIS and that you need all of your federal decisions made 90 days after the ROD. So I think all of you that have been involved in this PAC so far know that it takes more than 2 years normally to do an EIS. So that's one of the reasons that we're starting to see a lot of states, not just Connecticut, move towards this Pell process. But it's not new. It's been available in certain forms during different funding scenarios from the federal government. But it's been called Pell for quite a while. It's been called some other things beforehand, but it's getting more traction, and it's done throughout the country.
It just feels like it might be a program that came out of the Obama administration in order to force broader views on transportation projects, and that it's trickling down to us finally. Is that inaccurate?
A little bit, just in the way that it came about. NEPA definitely speaks to looking at a broader view and making sure that you're speaking to cumulative impacts and that you don't line up one project so that you only have one alternative that can move forward with another, right? So to say, like, there's some famous court cases out there of in the big bad old days of DOT's building a road that came right up and ended right at a park. So then the only way to expand the roadway any further would be to go right through the park. So those protections have been in place for a long time. Again, this Pell process has been more of an everyday counts initiative that's come out of FHWA, and to try to have things be more efficient with the process. That's been the push.
I think the other thing is we've seen in other states these Pells typically cover very long corridors that need to be sort of broken up. It's hard to find a logical sort of endpoint where there's not segmentation. And you know, I've been saying when these urban projects are so complex, you know, we started with a pretty focused mission of addressing infrastructure needs, but you know, as we went through the process, and you've seen it, right? You've seen the you know, the downtown gateway project come up when we moved the rail line, you know, the need to look at a station. You know, you see the interchange study come up. Every time a new idea has come to surface, we've had to stop, pause, evaluate it, and now, you know, and then of course, Congressman Larson's tunnel idea came up. We had to stop, evaluate it. There's just so many interconnected things when you get into a complex environment like this, and we're just seeing it grow and grow and grow. And some of these ideas are good and worth pursuing, so we want to make sure we continue to have that ability to do that in the future.
Just to add to what Kim said, yeah, Pell is nothing new. It's a new acronym on the same thing we've been doing, and to give Connecticut a lot of credit, it used to be called a major investment study, an MIS, and that's exactly what the DOT did between Hartford and New Britain, and that came up with the solution to build a CT fast track instead of widening I84. So this concept of looking at different modes in a pre-NEPA realm is nothing new to this state. So I just want to give you guys credit for that.
Two microphones. Other thoughts, comments? Thumbs up, thumbs down? I mean, we do want to move forward. Again, we're going to expand the PAC, some form of the PAC. It's got to include more membership from north of Hartford, south of Hartford, east of Hartford. You know, we do expect more stakeholders. We don't know what the configuration of the PAC is going to look like, but we certainly hope that all of you remain interested in participating in some way. You know, I'm sure in the next few months we'll be really trying to figure out what our approach is moving forward. But you know, it will still include robust public involvement. There'll be lots of opportunities to contribute. And if you don't have any questions that you want to say publicly here, feel free to come up and talk to us after this meeting, or to follow up with us at any time over the next couple of weeks. We'll definitely be available. We want to hear more from you. We feel like this is the right decision, but you know, certainly your perspectives are valuable to us. The consultant team, I believe, is staying the same.
The consultant team is staying the same. We weren't going to change that.
Marcy reminded me that the website is being updated to reflect these changes. It's not yet. but it will be soon. Oh, it is. It's happening as we speak. A lot of these things came on very quickly, but you know, we like I said, we have some fact sheets. Frequently asked questions will be up on the website. Feel free to go there, take a look. You know, we'll be putting out newsletters with this information, so there'll be a lot more communications on this as we move forward. But this is the new direction.
And I think as we leave, there's handouts, Marcy, there's a handout on what a Pell is, and then there's the handout for the fact sheet for what we're doing moving forward. So if you can grab one on the way out, that'd be great.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thank you.